From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kayleigh Lines, I'm Joe Matthew. The Monday edition of Balance of Power. Kayleigh, Joe Biden is out, and now the hard part begins. As more Democrats coalesce around Kamala Harris at this historic moment, we just heard from her with questions about the process. She didn't tell us anything when she spoke from the White House this morning.
No, of course, she still has a lot of work to do to actually lock up the Democratic nomination. Nothing is guaranteed with exactly 4 weeks to go until the beginning of the Democratic convention in Chicago on August 19th. But in her first remarks to the country, since announcing that she does intend to, in her words, earn and win the Democratic nomination, she chose not to talk about her own candidacy, but instead the legacy of President Biden.
And I am firsthand witness that every day our President Joe Biden fights for the American people, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for his service to our nation.
Now, we also understand from the vice president that she will be heading to Wilmington, Delaware later today to meet with the campaign headquarters and the people there. As she notes, there is just 105 days to go until the election. So for more on all of this, Bloomberg's David Gura is joining us now from New York. So, David, it's quite a picture to paint here. It's been less than 24 hours since Joe Biden's announcement that took many people by surprise. And yet in that 24-hour time, we've seen Kamala Harris and her campaign raise tens of millions of dollars. And it seems like almost every single high-profile Democrat has gotten in line behind her.
It's remarkable how fast all of this has moved. So, yes, that letter we got from President Biden yesterday was followed in quick succession by his endorsement of Kamala Harris's candidacy. And then almost immediately, just a long string of Democrats getting in line supporting her run for the nomination. And we'll see sort of what shape that takes in the coming days. With just a few exceptions, a few senior Democrats who haven't signed on to it, most of the kind of rank and file in the party, in the House and the Senate, have done that. Governors as well. Just fascinating to see. And going back to what we heard from Kamala Harris just a moment ago, I think that as fast as all this is moving you to, what strikes me is still this deference to the importance of the history here and what President Biden mentioned in that letter, that he intends to speak to the American public later this week to explain his decision. I think that might explain some of the hesitancy that we saw there from the vice president to begin campaigning in earnest outside of the White House today. I think we saw from her the same kind of nod to history and Joe Biden's place in it that we've seen in countless endorsements from lawmakers across the country. I think she's waiting for President Biden to button this up, if you'll let me use the phrase, before she moves ahead and begins to sort of campaign in earnest. But to your point, Kayleigh, about fundraising, just a remarkable last 24 hours here when you look at that Act Blue total of small dollar donations that have come into the Democratic Party, topping more than 50 million, the likes of which we haven't seen since, I believe, the day after Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court justice, passed away. Just a very strong showing for Democrats across the board, and certainly what seems like a ringing endorsement from a lot of the Democratic electorate for Vice President Harris's candidacy.
This story has been on fast forward for some time now, David, and I wonder, as we try to figure out the process, the mechanism through which the Democratic Party will actually use to nominate Kamala Harris unless something else dramatic takes place here, it's worth taking stock of the moment. We're meeting here on a Monday with, just over 100 days until the election. And this is something that most people who are watching us right now could not have imagined and don't remember from 1968. Put this in perspective for us as we try to make sense of these headlines.
Yeah, we look at that 1968 analogy. It's a good one, but recall that President Johnson made that decision much earlier in the campaign cycle. He made it in March, so there was a lot more time for all of this to play out. And indeed, there could be primaries to determine who would be the next nominee for the Democratic Party. That's not the case here. So, leading up to this, there was this swirl of worry or concern or just general, the novelty of this was really looming large. What would happen here? Could there be a mini primary? I think that we've seen some folks who've been agitating for that or suggesting that would be the correct course here, including Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, now endorsing Kamala Harris, perhaps quieting that. But you're right, Joe, to dwell on kind of the novelty or the newness of this. We were just a few weeks, as you said, away from that convention in Chicago. And we really don't know yet with any authority how all of this is going to play out. Nobody has put his or her hat into the ring to challenge Kamala Harris formally. That sort of leads a clear path for her to that nomination in Chicago. But there's still a lot of time in those 4 weeks. If we're living minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, there's a lot of time for there to be something that comes in here and perhaps throws a wrench in all of that. But we had Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, coming in and endorsing Kamala Harris as well. He plays a very big role in the Democratic Party here. One would think that things are looking good for her to reach that nomination. And certainly Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, was someone who said that he was thinking about running for president, thinking about challenging this process. He really made the rounds on television this morning at CNN and CBS and MSNBC, and we saw kind of an evolution in the way that he's approaching this. Initially raising concern that he wants centrists to be heard in this process, wants to know more about the policy platform of Kamala Harris. But as the morning went on, sort of stepping out from saying that he's going to run for president himself. So I think there must have been some sighs of relief within the Democratic Party establishment there.
David Gura, I'm glad you could be with us today reporting for Bloomberg. On this Monday after the news broke, we turn now to Seth Harris, former labor policy advisor to President Biden and senior fellow at the Burns Center. Seth, it's great to have you with us here at the table. Thank you for joining. You probably know Joe Biden better than anyone else we're going to talk to on the program today. And so I don't want to get too personal here, but I do. And what motivated him? Was the pressure too great for him to wait to speak to the American people, to do this in his own time, at his own pace, from the Oval Office? All we still have is a piece of letterhead.
Well, the defining character trait of Joe Biden, at least in his public life, has been resilience. He has suffered unfathomable personal losses. He has suffered professional setbacks that would have caused a lot of other people to go and lie in the fetal position on their beds. But he has always persevered, he has always continued, and he's always gone to work for the people he grew up with in Claymont, Delaware, and in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the middle-class, working-class families that he cares about so much, that he identifies with, and his family was that kind of a family. Mm-hmm. But there's an even more important trait about Joe Biden, and that is patriotism. He sees Donald Trump, I think correctly, and the Republican Party as an existential threat to democracy in the United States. And when he sat down with his top aides, Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donilon, and they showed him the data that showed that it was going to be very difficult for him to stop Donald Trump, he chose country over party, country over self, which, as you all know from doing this television show here in Washington, D.C., when you talk to a lot of politicians, that's not what politicians usually do. He chose to do the right thing for the country and for the working people of this country at great cost to himself. And I don't think it was that the pressure, I don't think it was the donors saying, we're not going to give you any money. It was that he cares about winning for working people. He cares about winning for democracy. It was, for me, personally, a very deeply sad day, but I've never been prouder of the man. And it's been my privilege to work with him in 2 administrations. He's a remarkable human being, and it's been my honor to be associated with him.
Well, it's a great reminder to us all, Seth, of just what Joe Biden has been as a public servant. We're talking half a century through surviving the loss of his wife, his daughter, eventually his son, Beau, continuing to serve through it all. But, of course, yesterday, not just a decision to no longer continue that service, at least in the presidential capacity, but a second decision that quickly followed his announcement to endorse Kamala Harris as someone he thinks should take the helm and be the Democratic nominee. How do you view that part of this decision-making process for Joe Biden? Because we'd had a lot of conversation in the week since the debate about how he needed convincing that Kamala could beat Trump if he could not. So should we rule that the polling suggested that Kamala could do it, or just that Joe Biden thought it would be the right thing to do to back up his vice president?
I think it's both. He saw polling that showed that not only that she can win, but that it's likely that she is going to be able to win. But also, he's deeply loyal to her. He picked her when he didn't have to pick her. And he positioned himself as a transitional figure in the Democratic Party, ushering in a new generation of Democrats who are going to carry the progressive values that he's lived his entire life forward. He has an agenda that he wants to see finished. He talks about finishing the job. He knows that she is the best situated person to do that.
It's been noted that Joe Biden is a hugger, that he likes to surround himself with people, his friends, his coworkers, his staff in this case, but he's had COVID and has been dealing with a very difficult environment as he comes to this decision. Has this been a depressing experience, a dark time for him? How would you describe it?
You know, I haven't spoken to him during this period, and I haven't spoken to the people immediately around him, understandably. They're focused inward, not focused outward. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I having experienced COVID myself and sitting in a house alone without your family, although he does have Dr. Biden there with him, although she's in a separate bedroom to keep her safe. Mm-hmm. It is difficult, particularly when you're trying to do business and you're not feeling especially well. But look, he's an amazingly tough man. I mean, he's made it to the age of 81 at the very peak of his profession, and he has accomplished remarkable things for this country. He lifted us out of a pandemic. He drove the economy to the best economy we've seen since the 1960s. He assembled a coalition to fight tyrants and to defend democracy all around the world. He's fighting democracy at home. He's been remarkably accomplished, even though he has experienced this illness now and he's experienced some physical setbacks otherwise. It's really an admirable record, and that's what he wanted to continue, and he was convinced that he could.
Well, you talk about an admirable record on the economy, and yet polling does suggest that he has not gotten credit for that. Voters do not feel good about the Biden economy. Can Harris message that differently than Biden, make that a narrative that works for her, do something that the president could not?
I think that there's going to be a lot of time and a lot of money spent making the case, comparing the Biden economy, now the Harris economy, to the Trump economy. President Trump is the first president since Herbert Hoover to leave office with fewer jobs than when he entered office. President Biden has set records for the number of jobs that have been created under his watch. Unemployment set a 50-year record at a low level below 4%. Real wages rising for working families. The bottom quarter of working families, the bottom quarter of incomes, seeing a dramatic increase in their real wages as well. The big issue has been prices. Even though inflation has come down dramatically and is barely hovering above what the Federal Reserve tells us is their policy target, again, not handed down from Sinai on tablets. But even though inflation has come down, prices are still too high. And that's what the American people are reacting to. So I think that the vice president will be able to talk about all of the accomplishments and the dramatic threat to our country that's posed by the Trump administration. The sales pitch will be very simply that the vice president and President Biden care about working people and whether or not their lives come out well. The other side can't make the same case.
Let's talk about the issue we associate you most closely with, and that's organized labor. Joe Biden professed to be the most union-friendly president in American history. We know that he's struggled with the rank and file to some extent, but won the endorsement of Shawn Fain in the UAW. It's been a little bit of a different relationship with the Teamsters. We just saw Sean O'Brien speaking in Milwaukee, as a matter of fact. Kamala Harris walked a picket line, I think, in 2019. What is her relationship with organized labor? Is this going to be the same campaign when it comes to unions?
Let me say President Biden is the most pro-union president, I would argue, in history, and the labor movement understands that, and that's why the AFL-CIO and a couple of dozen unions endorsed him earlier than they have ever endorsed any presidential candidate before. Vice President Harris doesn't have 50 years of history with organized labor in the way that President Biden does. She's newer to national politics. But during her time as vice president, she's been very deeply involved with organized labor. She chaired the White House task force on worker organizing and worker empowerment. That's where she and I work together most closely. She has spoken at conventions. She most recently spoke at the convention of Unite Here, which is the hospitality union. She spoke at the convention of the Service Employees International Union, which has already endorsed her. She has very effective and close working relationships with a number of national union leaders. They know her, they trust her. And my prediction is that every union that has endorsed President Biden will go forward through their democratic processes and ultimately endorse Vice President Harris. And the reason is they want this pro-union, pro-worker, bottom-up, middle-out economic strategy to continue. And Vice President Harris is the most likely candidate to be able to do that.
And yet, when you listen to the Republicans, especially the vice presidential nominee on that side, J.D. Vance, in his acceptance speech, he specifically called out the working men in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those Rust Belt states that he's trying to appeal to. In what way does the Harris and whomever campaign, assuming that she's the top of the ticket, need to counter that narrative that is also coming from the Republicans? They're competing for the same batch of voters here.
Yeah, all they have to do is tell the truth about J.D. Vance's record and Donald Trump's record. Donald Trump was the most anti-union president in the modern history of the United States. J.D. Vance has opposed every piece of legislation that would empower working people so that they can improve the quality of their lives that has been presented to him. They do not want working class populism. They don't want to put power in the hands of working people so that they can have a say in their workplaces and have a say in their communities. They want to make corporations bow down to government. That's their version of populism because they view themselves as speaking for the American people, a couple of guys out of the Ivy League trying to represent the working class. That's not the truth. Unless you are involved in putting forward an agenda that empowers workers by allowing them to build power through democratic organizations like unions, you're not for working class power in America.
The narrative right now is that Donald Trump is more concerned about running against Kamala Harris than he was against Joe Biden. The narrative a minute ago, 5 minutes ago maybe, is Joe Biden's the only person who can beat Donald Trump. Does this actually change the calculus for Donald Trump? Can she beat him more easily than Joe Biden, in your view?
Well, I think it does change the calculus. They have organized their entire campaign around running against President Biden, and age was their best argument against President Biden.
So she immediately turns the table on the age issue.
Absolutely. And she is an extraordinarily effective campaigner. Let me say, as somebody who has been put in what we call the witness chair when I was briefing her, when she would ask some really tough, formidable questions when you were briefing her on whatever topic it was. I'd happen to be labor for me. So he's going to encounter that. If he has the courage to debate her, I think he's going to back out of the debates because at bottom he's really quite cowardly. And he also doesn't, let me also add one other piece to this calculus. Donald Trump has a sort of difficult relationship with women. And the idea that he is going to go toe-to-toe with a former prosecutor who is a woman and a person of color, I think that he's pretty worried about that.
All right, Seth, it's great to have you join us on this day of days. Seth Harris, former labor policy advisor to President Biden and senior fellow at the Burns Center. Great to have you reflecting on the legacy of the president as well. And still ahead, we'll talk more about what Seth was just discussing, the role of women here, and welcome Jessica Mackler, who runs America's largest PAC devoted to electing Democratic women, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew here in Washington, where the world was rocked yesterday with the announcement of Joe Biden that he is not seeking re-election, instead endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee. We are watching history being made in real time, especially when we consider that in the endorsement of Kamala Harris, which many other high-profile Democrats, including some of the governors we thought may toss their own hats into the ring for the nomination, that she is a woman and a woman of color who is now potentially going to be the top of the ticket for one of the major parties in this election cycle.
Yeah, you've got an historic candidacy, at least on the verge of being made official here, Kaylee. And as we were discussing with Seth a short time ago, potentially changed the calculus for Donald Trump, who did run against a woman in Hillary Clinton. But this is a very different case in a very different election against a backdrop of very different politics in America.
Well, and I actually raised the parallel to 2016 yesterday in our special coverage with former Congresswoman Jeanne and asked her if America wasn't necessarily ready for a female president then, are we ready for one now?
Absolutely. America was ready for a female president the last time. Hillary narrowly lost, sadly. And I think some campaign choices that she made were responsible for that. She didn't go to the Midwest. She stayed on the coast. I don't think Kamala Harris will make those mistakes.
This is something we're going to be talking about a lot over the course of the hour. Coming up with our panel, by the way, Rick Davison, Jeanne, Zaino are with us as we try to pick through the pieces here. The endorsements, though, hard to argue with. To your point, Kaylee, and we're hearing from a number of state delegations to the Chicago convention. We can add Florida to the list. But none of this is official yet, and there are still a lot of questions about what process the party will follow in making this nomination real. Yeah, of course, we have 4 weeks to go until the actual convention, which begins August 19th in Chicago, and 99% of the pledged delegates were pledged to Joe Biden. Now, some of the delegations, including the likes of New Hampshire, Tennessee, North and South Carolina, have chosen otherwise with Biden's decision. Now, of course, there's going to be a big debate about the legal ramifications here. Some Republicans think that this could be blocked in court. And the idea that this was somehow a setup or an abandonment of 14 million voters. It's interesting as the talking points come together on both sides of the aisle. Certainly. But certainly the endorsements and the money are coming together on the Democratic side of the aisle, as we have been discussing. More than $50 million raised by Kamala Harris in just the 7 hours after her announcement that she does intend to win and earn the Democratic nomination. And there could be more money thrown at her. Emily's List, which, of course, is a group that focuses on getting women into elected office. It's the largest PAC that's focused on that effort. Yesterday pledged to spend at least $20 million to support Harris's bid for the presidency. So let's turn now to Jessica Mackler. She is president of Emily's List, to have more on her reaction to the event. So obviously making a big financial commitment to Vice President Kamala Harris. Have you seen an influx in donations? Can you just describe what the last 24 hours have been like for you, Jessica?
Well, this is an incredible time and a real momentous moment for this country. And I think what we've seen in the last 24 hours, not even 24 hours, is a true outpouring of support all over the country. Every region, leaders at all levels of the ballot, organizations. For us, this was an easy call. It wasn't just a day one endorsement. It was an hour one endorsement. We've been with Vice President Harris throughout her career, and we are thrilled to stand with her as she takes the helm at the top of the ticket. There is no one who is more stronger on the issue of reproductive freedom and abortion rights. That is what is going to decide this election. So what we are seeing is truly that enthusiasm and excitement for Vice President Harris's candidacy, and we're thrilled to stand with her.
Jessica, how important will it be to get Nancy Pelosi behind this effort? How soon does that need to happen?
Well, look, I think, like I said, what we have seen is an outpouring of support for the vice president from all over the country. You think it's inevitable? Well, you know, I'm not going to speak. No one's going to speak for Nancy Pelosi. But like I said, you can see that there is an outpouring of support across this country for Vice President Harris. There is no one who is more ready to win this campaign against Donald Trump. And there is no one who is more prepared to lead this country than Vice President Harris.
Well, Jessica, I'd like to ask you the same question I asked Jane Harman last evening, which is that we have seen specifically Donald Trump run against a female candidate before. Hillary Clinton did that in 2016. What does Kamala Harris need to do to make sure that this election ultimately doesn't end up like 2016 with a victory for Donald Trump?
Well, look, I think one of the things we have to understand, and we've been doing at Emily's List research on the vice president for this past year and have been with her for many years. So I'm going to, take this on looking forward. And what I know, based on that research, based on the work that we've done for the vice president, is that she is well equipped to litigate this case against Donald Trump. The research that we have done shows that when we talk about the vice president's record on issues like reproductive freedom, she is so compelling to voters, the voters that we need to turn out and win in November, young voters, women, voters of color. When we talk to them about her record and the work that she has done over the course of her career in standing up on reproductive freedom and other issues, they come to this ticket, and we expect that that's what's going to happen in November. I will also say that we know, and we've seen since the Dobbs decision, that when we put a clear choice in front of voters around the stakes on abortion rights, when we talk to them about what is in front of them in these elections, Democrats win. And we're going to do that again with our best messenger on abortion rights in Vice President Harris.
Jessica, I wonder what you make of some of the rhetoric that we're already hearing surrounding a potential Kamala Harris candidacy here, a Harris campaign. You know that it's been sport here in Washington to mispronounce her name on a regular basis, which Donald Trump continues to do. Chris LaCivita, the co-manager of the campaign, issued a statement saying that Trump survived an assassin's bullet. The last thing we're worrying about is Laughin' Kamala. That's apparently going to be the nickname that Donald Trump uses going forward here. There's another one that I heard that isn't worth repeating. I just wonder to what extent she should acknowledge this.
Well, look, as you just outlined, there are going to be some really gross racist and sexist attacks against the vice president. We've already seen that. We know that Republicans are going to do that. And so that is something that at Emily's List, we have fought back against for a long time, the disinformation, the misinformation that we know women of color candidates in particular are targets of. I have to tell you that Republicans are doing this because they are terrified about Kamala Harris. They are terrified to face such an accomplished and prepared candidate who is going to be able to effectively litigate a case on an issue that we know is going to win this election, abortion rights. But not just that. They are terrified of a candidate who is ready to lead on day one. For the past 3 years, she has been on a national stage. She has cultivated relationships with world leaders. She has delivered economic relief for people across this country. She has an incredible record throughout her career of fighting for people. So they're scared, and they are going to resort to the tactics that they always resort to in these times, and they are going to resort to these racist and sexist attacks. We are going to push back against those, and we're going to do the work of amplifying her voice. And we know that when we do that, voters will be compelled to vote for her, and we will win.
Well, Jessica, of course, at Emily's List, while you are going to be throwing your support behind Kamala Harris's presidential ambitions, your wider mission is to get Democratic women elected into office at all levels of the U.S. government. Knowing what we have learned in the last 24 hours, the notion that concern about Democrats being able to retain control of the Senate or get control of the House, the down ballot implications had a factor in Joe Biden's decision. Would Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket actually help some of those vulnerable Democrats that we're watching, like Senator Tammy Baldwin or Senator Jackie Rosen? How do you view that?
Well, first of all, I'll say that the electric energy that we're feeling in the Democratic Party right now is incredibly helpful. It is the jolt that we need to get back to a conversation that we know is what is going to decide this election. That we need to have a conversation with voters that is consistent and clear about the choice that they are facing in this election. And that is true at every level of the ballot. We talk to voters about the stakes on abortion rights and reproductive freedom, the choice that they have between a ticket that is going to defend and restore those rights, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who would enact a national abortion ban, who've signed on for these awful state abortion bans that are in place right now, and for the most dangerous elements of Project 2025. Voters are clear that they will stand with us. And that choice, when we put it in front of voters, whether we're talking about a state legislative race, a U.S. Senate race, or the race for the presidency, we know Democrats will be successful if that's the conversation we're having. And that's exactly what we're going to do between now and November.
It appears that Marianne Williamson is going to take a swing at the nomination if given the opportunity. Jessica says she will compete for the spot after previously leaving the race and getting back into the race. Should she be given that chance?
Well, look, I think this is a democracy, but what we've seen from in the last 24 hours is just an incredible show of support for Vice President Harris. We have seen that from, as I've said, every region of the country, elected officials at all levels of the ballot. We've seen it from organizations that are on a whole wide range of issues. And they all know what I know, which is that there is no one more prepared to win this election against Donald Trump. There was no one who is more prepared to lead this country on day one than Kamala Harris. So I fully expect that Kamala Harris is going to be our Democratic nominee, and she is going to win in November and will be in the White House at this time next year.
Well, Jessica, of course, if she is the top of the ticket, someone needs to be on that ticket with her. I've heard suggestions in the last 24 hours that if it is to be Kamala Harris, a woman of color, who is leading the Democratic ticket, that it's going to need to be a white man on it with her to balance things out. What do you think of that notion? Should she be considering a woman like Governor Gretchen Whitmer to be her vice president if she wins the nomination?
Well, I'm not going to put my own parameters out there for the vice president. I trust her to make the decision that's right for her, to choose a partner who is going to serve admirably with her and is going to be the right partner for her in this ticket. But I will say that regardless of who she chooses, we know that that ticket is going to provide a really clear contrast with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who embrace the most extreme elements of the Republican Party and the MAGA movement. And this is going to be a clear choice between a ticket that is going to stand up and defend our rights and our freedoms, that is going to be for a better economic future for our country, and a choice between Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who, as I said, embrace the most dangerous elements of Project 2025 and are going to take this country down a really dark path. That's the choice voters are going to have in front of them, regardless of who is on this ticket with us. That is going to be the choice in November.
Jessica, I want to get back to something that we were talking about a bit earlier, and that's just the change in stakes for Donald Trump to be debating a woman, and in this case, a woman of color, and lessons learned from the 2016 race in which Donald Trump shared a stage with Hillary Clinton. What do you expect to see if Donald Trump actually makes good on this debate appointment that he had with Joe Biden? I realize that he might want a different venue at this point, but if something takes place in a debate between these two candidates, how does this change the game for Donald Trump?
Well, I am sure that Donald Trump and his team have seen what I've seen, and that is a lifetime and a record of achievement from Kamala Harris, and just an incredible litigator. Her background as a prosecutor, we saw it in the U.S. Senate on display in the Judiciary Committee. No one wants to be in her line of sight when it comes to having to defend a record that the American people are clear that they don't want. And so I expect that they have to be pretty scared of that moment. She's an incredibly effective messenger on issues, including reproductive freedom, but certainly not limited to that. And it is going to be a daunting task for them. She's going to litigate this case incredibly effectively against Donald Trump.
Well, Jessica, you've mentioned reproductive freedom a few times during this conversation. It was a conversation that notably wasn't really being had in Milwaukee, where Joe and I were last week. And a lot of the discussions we were having with people gathered there and strategists was this notion that the Republican Party, and especially Donald Trump in selecting J.D. Vance as his vice presidential nominee, seems to have decided not to go for suburban women in this election cycle, to focus on rural areas, working class men in particular. Do you think having Harris at the top of the ticket may actually change that strategy, and you have to counter what could be a more concerted effort with the Republicans and the Trump campaign to go after that same base of voters?
Well, I will say, I mean, watching the RNC last week, I know that Republicans like Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, they can read polls and they don't want to talk about this issue. But unfortunately for them, this is not a branding problem for them. It's an agenda problem. And it doesn't matter where you are in this country. We have seen since the Dobbs decision in red states, purple states, all over this country, people believe overwhelmingly that these are decisions that belong with individuals, that they should be able to make them themselves, their private medical choices, and that these are decisions that the government, bureaucracy, courts should not be involved in. They are very clear on that. Voters are very clear on that. And so the problem for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Republicans like them up and down the ticket is that you can run, but you cannot hide from this. We know their records. We're going to put that in front of voters. And wherever you are, again, around the country, they are on the wrong side of this issue.
Jessica, it's great to have you. Jessica Mackler, the president of Emily's List, America's largest PAC devoted to electing Democratic women, and in this case, devoting $20 million to the Kamala Harris for President campaign. It's great to have you here. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kayleigh Lines, where we have two major endorsements dropping in our laps here from the Senate. Kayleigh, Kamala Harris already had a majority of Senate Democrats, and she adds two more.
Yeah, the list is getting longer, including the senator from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen, out with an endorsement. And also, interestingly, Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, who had been one of the most vocal advocates for Joe Biden, the president, staying in the race, now out with a post on X that he is proud to support and be all in for the next president. He says Kamala Harris attached is a picture that says, "Let's win this. Harris for president."
That's a big one. He's been speaking passionately on behalf of Joe Biden, pointing to his own experience with a difficult debate. Yep. And that is a meaningful one for Kamala Harris. As we said, this is moving quickly, and there will probably be more developments in Kamala Harris's campaign as the program goes here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We've got another 90 minutes that we'll keep tabs on this, Kaylee and I, but also keeping an eye, of course, always on the markets. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle ahead of our panel. Abigail, how do things look today on Wall Street?
Well, today is another great day, a great example of the intersection between business and politics, because President Joe Biden dropping out of the U.S. presidential race yesterday, absolutely influencing markets, investors weighing the possibility of VP Kamala Harris as a candidate, and some are calling it a 2024 reset. I don't think the markets are going that far, but right now we do have a nice gain in contrast to last week's decline. It's interesting, when futures opened up yesterday around 6 p.m. Eastern, up just slightly. So I think investors were trying to figure it out. At one point today, up more than 1%, then down, back up, down. That's a long way of saying that there is some volatility, some uncertainty. But beneath the surface, right now, we obviously don't have a quote-unquote Harris trade. We don't know exactly what her policies will be, but we can evaluate the Trump trade, and it is off. It's off of where it was last week. Some of the big tech names today are higher, including NVIDIA, the chip company, also Tesla, ahead of reporting earnings tomorrow. You might be able to say that Tesla is a nod toward Trump, but let's just put that in the tech bucket right now. On the other side, some of the old school stocks, such as Caterpillar and United Health, more of that value trade, which would be associated with the Trump ticket, that side's down. So we're seeing a little bit of a rebalancing. When we take a look at the predicted odds, this is really pretty interesting because, of course, Donald Trump last week, after that assassination attempt and his reaction to it, took a big leap above Joe Biden. Joe Biden is still on this chart, but I think it's as a margin of error at 2%. We have Donald Trump at 61%, Kamala Harris at 40%. So there is a greater than 20% spread there. And of course, she's not the official nominee yet. It will be an open convention. It seems in this environment, anything is possible. So we'll have to watch this spread really, really closely. And we'll also, of course, be watching markets to see whether or not these gains stay in place and the moves beneath the surface, Kelly.
All right, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle in New York. Thank you so much, Joe. This is something else we were discussing in our special coverage last night. Just thinking of the timeline here. We are today exactly 4 weeks out from the Democratic Convention in Chicago, which begins August 19th, which is just weeks away from the Fed's meeting in September, in which the prevailing wisdom in the markets is they're getting ready to cut rates. And something I kept asking is, this has injected a whole other element of political uncertainty that was not there before for the Federal Reserve. And if the race is upended in this way, does it actually change the calculation as to whether or not they want to cut rates before the election, knowing that everything could be even more highly politicized? Most of the markets experts that we spoke with yesterday said they don't think so, but it's still something to consider.
I think whatever happens, you're going to hear cries of politics being at play, especially if it's a member of this administration. It's a little bit different, I guess, when you think about an outsider coming into this race. But a lot of Republicans see Kamala Harris as just another Joe Biden, therefore same calculus on the Fed, right?
Yeah, certainly we've seen that Republican narrative coming up already as they try to connect Harris to a number of Biden administration policies, including the border. So now let's bring in our political panel. Rick Davis of StoneCourt Capital is with us, alongside Jeanne Zaino of Iona University. Of course, both of them Bloomberg Politics contributors. As we consider here, and we've been talking for the better part of the last hour about the notion of Vice President Kamala Harris being the top of the ticket for the Democrats. And of course, Jeanne, is not a foregone conclusion. Yet with the number of endorsements she has received, with the amount of money she has raised just in the last 24 hours, is this inevitable?
I wouldn't say anything's inevitable in this election cycle. You still have a number of Democrats, smaller and smaller to your point, who are saying Democrats have a time here to have a fresh start. Delegates should have the ability to make a choice. But that being said, I give it about 24, 48 hours. If we don't see a challenger come forward in that time frame, very difficult for them to mount a campaign to win over those delegates who were already pledged to Joe Biden, who have now been counseled by him to pledge themselves to Harris. They could go in another direction. But again, that becomes a lot harder. So I wouldn't quite say inevitable, but I would say it's looking less likely, like we get a challenger at every hour that goes by.
Rick, Axios is reporting a 12-page internal memo obtained from the Trump campaign that shows they've been planning for this possibility for some time, going back to May. And the word from Chris LaCivita, the Trump campaign manager, you can move the chairs on a sinking boat all you want, doesn't change the result. Will there be a different playbook for Kamala Harris than Joe Biden?
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to go after her right away. I think this is really the key issue for Democrats. I mean, if they, sort of take the approach that Jeanne just mentioned and sort of actually think that there's a nomination process going on, they'll lack the resources and the focus to get Kamala Harris defined into the American public, giving Donald Trump plenty of time to define her his way. And it will be brutal. Look what he did to Ron DeSantis when Ron DeSantis demurred at announcing for president. He was dead before he started. And Kamala Harris risks the same thing. Donald Trump will not hesitate. He's already been going after her during the Republican convention. They have a game plan in place. It's already started. There are ads ready to be made for Kamala Harris to be that presumptive nominee, and she needs to start acting like such. And the Democratic Party ought to quit this fantasy that somehow there's a contest still yet to be run. If they act that way and kill the next 2 or 3 weeks running up to the convention and not defend their candidate, she's going to be at risk of being defined completely by Donald Trump.
Well, Rick, she had a sense in some way, or a chance rather, in some way to help define herself when she spoke from the White House in her first event since all of this went down yesterday. Instead, she chose to talk about the legacy of Joe Biden and his honesty and integrity, how she's deeply appreciative of his service to the country. And it raises the question, as she was discussing at the White House, this notion that he's eager to get back out there as he recovers from COVID. Should Kamala Harris want Joe Biden to be campaigning alongside her as she goes through this process? Or is it best, in your view, Rick, to keep the president at arm's length, given everything we were just discussing?
Obviously, there needs to be some orderly transition. I think she's, obviously doing a hat bow to her president and mentor. And frankly, the reason she's the nominee is because of Joe Biden. But that cannot last beyond today. She needs to strike out on her own. She needs to be communicating to voters directly about what her plans and aspirations are for the country. She needs to burnish her credentials as a prosecutor. She needs to reset this campaign. And again, if she doesn't reset it, Donald Trump will. He's more than happy to have her spending the day talking about Joe Biden in the White House. And I think that every day the Democrats continue with this kind of strategy, they're losing a chance to define this election in a new way. She's an insurgent. She's an underdog. She needs to play that card. American public loves an underdog. I won a lot of nominations with underdogs. And the reality is this is the new reset in this campaign. She's not running as an incumbent, and she needs to focus her attention on the campaign. Hopefully this will be the last of her time spending in the White House. She's not winning any points with voters standing in the White House. She needs to stand in their communities and talk about how she's going to fix the problems that exist today. She doesn't have to blame anybody, but she has to have solutions.
Mm-hmm. Jeanne, speak to the urgency of the moment that Rick is describing. What should this handoff look like, assuming Joe Biden is well enough to address the American people? Will there be an Oval Office address Tuesday, Wednesday? And at that point, what does he do to fend off calls to finish the rest of his term? Because those are growing louder as well. I saw several Republicans doing morning shows today talking about the 25th Amendment. How does he address the Kamala Harris issue and quiet the peanut gallery while he's at it?
Whether he does it from the Oval Office, I don't know if he will, but he is going to come out and speak. And I do think it makes sense for Kamala Harris to hold her fire, so to speak, until that moment. This needs to be seen by voters as an orderly handover, if you will, transition. And we heard Donald Trump out over the weekend. The more Donald Trump out there saying outrageous things, the kinder, gentler Donald Trump we were promised has not materialized. It may be for the first half hour on the stage in Milwaukee on Thursday night, but look at what he had to say over the weekend. So the more Donald Trump out there attacking Kamala Harris, the better. And this needs to be an orderly transfer. And so I think she waits until Joe Biden comes out, whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday. But behind the scenes, we know she is already working furiously. She is contacting delegates. She is contacting members of Congress. So she is doing the right thing. And you know how we know that? Over $50 million in small money donations raised since Joe Biden made this announcement and endorsed her. So it's headed in the right direction. Rick is right. There's a lot of work to be done to differentiate herself from Trump, but also from Joe Biden. But there are very clear distinctions between both. Let's just start with the age issue for a moment. So I think she's got a little bit of time to do that. Not a lot, but I do think it makes sense to wait for the president to speak. And by the way, the 25th Amendment is absurd. Joe Biden said he was not going to run. He never said he was infirmed in any way. And there's a big distinction.
Not a distinction Republicans seem to be making right now. Jeanne, as you talk about the work that Kamala Harris is already doing, she also says that she's heading to Wilmington, Delaware today to meet at campaign headquarters with the staff as she really tries to hit the ground running in what she's describing as the first full day of her presidential campaign. In the meantime, if you look at what the Republican ticket is doing, Senator J.D. Vance, the vice presidential nominee for Donald Trump, is going to be in Virginia later today, a state in which we've been talking about potentially being a toss-up if Joe Biden was leading the Democratic ticket. Is that now off the table, regardless of if it's Harris or anyone else, because it's not Joe Biden? Does it take states like Virginia and Minnesota back off the map?
I don't think the Democrats should even, dream that big. I think they have to fight for every vote. The last poll I saw in Virginia was Kamala Harris up 5 over Donald Trump. I don't know if that still holds, but that was on the backs of women and black voters. And so she seemed to have a slight advantage there. But I think the Democrats can't take any of that for granted. And I think, by the way, speaking of J.D. Vance, the fact that Donald Trump had to go first with his pick and they have doubled down on MAGA and now are facing Kamala Harris is a little bit tougher than Republicans are letting on. This was going to be a fight in the Rust Belt. What about if she opens it again to the Sun Belt with a Kelly or a Cooper sort of pull, or even somebody like Raphael Warnock as a VP nominee? So this could get very interesting, but I think they still have to fight hard for these purplish states like Virginia.
Rick, I want to ask you about the age issue. Kamala Harris is 59 years old. This automatically becomes an issue if conducted the right way to her benefit. How would you advise the campaign to turn the tables here on the 78-year-old Donald Trump?
Well, I'd immediately release an ad attacking Donald Trump on the fact that he's, old and infirm. Turnabout is fair play in politics. Donald Trump spent a year and a half, 2 years attacking Joe Biden on his age, and she'd be I'd say crazy not to take the same script that he had and turn it on him. It is an issue with the American public that he was considered too old to run by a majority of the electorate and a large portion of his own party. So I would turn that. That's like a chip shot in golf. I mean, you want to do that all day long. And I'd say, too, the first thing she does is visit the campaign staff in Delaware and say she's moving the campaign out of Delaware and into Philadelphia. Delaware's, last I heard, a state that she can count on those electoral votes, but she doesn't get to be president and she doesn't win Pennsylvania. And regardless of who she picks for vice president, she ought to relocate that campaign. And that ought to be today's announcement, not, sometime in the future.
Wow.
Well, on the subject of vice presidents, the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, just told a Michigan TV station, WNLS, that she wouldn't take the vice presidential nomination. So that takes out potentially one key swing state. Rick, if it's not Whitmer, knowing you were just talking about Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania, should it be Shapiro? Is that the smartest choice?
It can be Shapiro. It can be, North Carolina, Arizona. I mean, there are plenty of states that she needs to win. But certainly if you're looking strategically at this campaign today, and let's say it's a reset back to where Donald Trump was shortly after his convictions on 34 felony counts, she's got to win, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. We know that. And so if she's got a shot at putting a talented, young, ideologically consistent Democrat on her ticket, she ought to take one of those. And it makes sense that Whitmer would take herself out of the running. It's very hard to imagine Democrats would want to have a ticket with two women. Certainly plausible. I wouldn't be opposed to it. But you've got Josh Shapiro, a successful governor, wildly popular, and in a state of Pennsylvania that you have to win. If she can put together a coalition of, the blue wall and pick off that district in Nebraska and not lose any other states that Joe Biden won in 2020, she's president. It's really not a hard formula to figure out. And it is interesting that the vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, for the Republicans is going to Virginia. I'll bet you don't see a lot of travel to Virginia in the near term. I mean, sure, they got to try and turn some of these states. But in this reset, I bet you they go back to the base and start really pounding away on those same states that we were just talking about.
This is really interesting. Jeanne, with all that said, how long does Kamala Harris have to pick a running mate?
Well, I think she's got to be sure that she is the nominee first, or she has the delegates wrapped up to be the nominee. And of course, we know that Democrats hope to do that by August 7th. So I think she has a little bit of time. I think Whitmer pulling herself out of that is a reflection of the fact that we are hearing on the ground pretty clearly that Whitmer and the team do not feel that they would put another woman on the ticket. And I think that reflects a sort of assumption and a strategic decision that Americans are not prepared for a ticket of two women. Maybe that won't be the case, and hopefully we are more advanced than that. But that seems to be what we are hearing. And if you think about the states Rick was just talking about, that leaves people like Shapiro or Cooper, Gavin Newsom being out, another Californian, or maybe Kelly. So there are still some people out there that could fill this, and a lot of talent on the Democratic bench. And we shouldn't forget about Polis, for instance, another talented, a lot of talented governors on the Democratic side to choose from, and Pritzker as well. So, but if she goes states, it'll be Shapiro or it'll be Cooper or somebody like that.
Looking ahead to the next steps with our signature panel, Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis. They'll be back with us in our second hour of Balance of Power. It's the Monday edition, but it feels like a special. Frank Luntz will join Kaylee and I coming up, so stay with us on Bloomberg TV and radio.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lines. As we're getting ready to mark almost exactly 24 hours since Joe Biden's historic decision to drop out of the presidential race, not seek re-election to a second term, and instead throw his endorsement behind his Vice President Kamala Harris. And the list of Democrats who have followed him in that, Joe, is getting longer almost every hour.
Senator John Fetterman, the most recent surprise that we've seen here. Maybe you see this as inevitable, but he was, of course, behind Joe Biden until the very end, speaking passionately in his defense. It gives us a sense of where this is going. We've seen a number of groups also that will state delegations that will be on the floor of the convention. This is the important part of this, Kaylee. What happens to the delegates? You can add important states like Illinois, North Carolina, and now Florida, as Kamala Harris tries to coalesce support around her today. Interesting. She spoke from the White House. It was all business. Didn't mention her campaign.
No, just talked instead about the legacy of President Biden. Of course, we should note it is not a foregone conclusion that Harris will ultimately become the Democratic nominee. The convention is 4 weeks from today, and theoretically, there is still room for another candidate to throw their hat in the race. It's worth noting, though, that the Democratic governors, who many thought would be on the short list of people who could potentially lead the ticket, Pritzker, Whitmer, Newsom, I could go on, Wes Moore, Josh Shapiro, they've all lined up behind Harris, keeping with President Biden. in endorsing her.
So maybe it's now a race for running mate among that class, obviously, although Gretchen Whitmer just said in an interview she's not interested here. So we're starting to winnow the list with very little time to play with here. And this is where we start our conversation with Bloomberg's Laura Davison in an hour that will include many voices to help us understand the latest around all of this. Laura, it's great to see you as you edit politics here for Bloomberg. Your thoughts now as the party coalesces around Kamala Harris. When will this be shut down? Because it does seem that we're turning away from the idea of a contested convention.
It could be, hours or even just a day or two. She has, as of a couple minutes ago, about half the delegates she needs to secure the nomination. Just all morning long, different delegates from different delegations have been pledging their support. Once she hits that, it's about 1,900 delegates, a little bit more, she will officially become the party's nominee. That's likely to just continue as no one has come out to challenge her. Everyone has lined up behind her. There were a couple folks, J.B. Pritzker being one, who waited until this morning to officially endorse her. But it's clear that the party wants to move forward, not have a big, open, contested fight here.
Well, it's not just about the endorsements, Laura. It's also about the money. And we already knew one of the advantages Kamala Harris would have is access to what was the Biden-Harris campaign war chest with hundreds of millions of dollars in it that she can now tap. But in the last 24 hours, or really just the 7 hours, we understand, in the time at which she announced that she does intend to compete and earn the Democratic nomination, $50 million raised from grassroots donors. And I would imagine that number has only gone higher in the period between last night and now.
Yes, this number is, is a couple hours old, so we can anticipate that there will be, a larger number still yet to come. 50 million is huge. The entire Biden campaign in the month of June raised about $64 million. So in just a single day, she raised almost what they had in the entirety of a month. Important to note, too, as you noted, that, she's able to take all of the bank accounts that already existed for the Biden campaign, but also all of the infrastructure. The staff still has their same email. She has the staff. They have the office space. She's headed there this afternoon to talk to them and rally the troops. It's really a turnkey campaign. They changed the branding. They've already done that on some of the emails to the Harris for president, and just continue with a very similar playbook going forward.
Must have been a fun overnight for the IT guys. I do think we should talk about some of the omissions, though.
Yeah.
Right. We have not heard from Chuck Schumer. We have not heard from Hakeem Jeffries, not officially. We have not heard from Nancy Pelosi or Barack Obama. Which of these are most important for Kamala Harris, and what are they waiting for?
The Obamas for the base are the most important thing, but for congressional support, she will need both Jeffries and Schumer, but really Pelosi. She was the one who was sort of the force sort of urging Joe Biden to step out of this race. Here's the thing, though, is the leaders said, look, we're going to just step back and let our members do what they want to do, vote their conscience, see where the party goes without strong-arming it, because they knew that if they did sort of try to, usher in Harris or anyone else's nominee, they would get a lot of blowback for trying to, force a process here. Yeah. So they let it happen organically, see it that donors are coming to her side, see that, the rank and file of the party, and then Democrats can say, look,
Trump's
we had a process.
Calling it rigged, though, isn't he?
He is, in fact. However, it's party rules. For both a primary process, you can have primaries, you can have caucuses, you can, roll a dice and pick, whatever the party says is how it goes.
Well, is that another way of saying, Laura, that if Republicans or groups like the Heritage Foundation decide to mount a lawsuit to try and go against the idea that Biden is not going to be on the ballot in November, that it won't actually be legally successful, or at the very least not legally sorted out in time?
It is highly unlikely that it will be successful legally. There are, some different avenues people are looking into this. We've seen courts do surprising things, so it is not impossible. However, if this had happened after the convention, then those challenges would be much more, have a greater chance of success. Because it's before a convention, it's a lot harder to argue that case.
What's the next step for her after she visits the campaign headquarters today? Does her campaign effectively begin tomorrow?
Yeah, it's already begun. She's already filed with the FEC, and she will, continue, both her vice presidential duties, probably stepping in with some of this work that Biden has been doing, as well as hitting the campaign trail. So we could see a strategy shift from the campaign. Biden was really focusing on those blue wall states. Harris was more deployed strategically in places like Arizona, Nevada, talking about specific issues, things like gun rights, or rather gun control, abortion access. But you'll start to see her take on a larger portfolio as she is now the candidate.
All right, Bloomberg's Laura Davison. Thank you so much. It's been a wild 24 hours for Laura and the entire politics team at Bloomberg News, as it has been, I'm sure, for our next guest, pollster Frank Luntz, founder and president of FIL Inc., who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Frank, great to see you. You were on with us months ago talking about how Joe Biden was not going to be able to win this election because he is too old. The age issue potentially taken away if Harris is at the top of the ticket. She's only 59. Can she beat Donald Trump? Does the data suggest right now that she can?
Yes, she can. I've already done an op-ed for the Financial Times, for the Times of London. This campaign, for me anyways, begun 24 hours or 18 hours ago. The age issue is now a Trump issue. It's not that it's been taken away. Now Trump has to defend some of the things that he spoke of because he would be the oldest person ever elected if he were to serve 4 years. She changes the entire equation. She brings young women to the table who had no interest in voting for Joe Biden and were not attracted to Donald Trump. She brings African Americans who are completely disinterested in this campaign. And these matter in states across the country. I wrote just 72 hours ago that unless things dramatically changed, it was going to be Trump, that you can now pretty well declare him because not only was he winning the swing states, but he had the passion, the energy, the intensity of vote. Every Trump supporter is going to be a Trump voter, for sure. And that was not the same with Biden. Now that it's Harris, everything changes, and I can't call it. And I can't wait for that debate. And by the way, I will pay money. I will seriously donate $10,000 right now if ABC News hosts that debate and you let me sit in the studio. I will pay $10,000 to ABC News' or Bloomberg or
I was going to say, I'd like to host that debate. Frank, what about me and Joe?
Yes, I'd love you guys to do it because at least I could get into the building because that would be the most just contentious debate ever. These two candidates don't like each other, don't respect each other, and have no hesitation to express it. We're going to have the most negative campaign in the history of American politics, and I want a front row seat.
So this turns the race completely here, in your view. Kamala Harris has been beset with low favorability ratings. She has been laden with a difficult portfolio. Until recently, the abortion issue has played in her favor based on some of our polling, as opposed to the border. Americans think they know Kamala Harris. Do they actually? What will they learn about her in the weeks ahead?
She has the chance to redefine herself. Everything starts fresh.
So start from scratch.
You start from scratch and how she presents herself. I brought this up yesterday, the laughter that she would use, and I was criticized for saying it. Why is it that women get yelled at for laughing? Well, the fact is, in so many interviews, back to back to back, you can see it on YouTube, this is what she does when she gets asked a tough question. That's number one. Number two is she wouldn't go to the border for month after month after month. As Republican House members, Republican senators were going down to make it an issue, she stayed away because she knew that it was toxic for her. Number three, she never created a separate identity from Joe Biden. And number four, quite frankly, she went through staff pretty darn fast. And that tells you something about the character of an individual. None of that matters now. It's all from this point forward. She has the chance to redo herself. And you can see by the $50 million raised in one day in small donations how significant this decision was. This race is on Monday, whatever date this is, the race begins again with 100 days to go.
Well, I wonder here how high the bar is for her, because we've talked so much during this cycle about double haters who didn't want Trump or Biden, or the Nikki Haley primary voters who were decidedly not voting for Donald Trump even after she had abandoned her presidential campaign. How easy is the conversion from a double hater or Nikki Haley voter to potentially a Kamala Harris voter?
It's not easy, but it can happen. And what's particularly important in this is that the numbers are so small. There was only 4% undecided before Harris became the likely Democratic nominee. Now it's probably up to 6 or 7% as people take a look at her. You don't have to swing that many voters to create the 270 electoral votes. And the states that mattered before matter now. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those are the 3 states that are truly in play. And those states, this is why I think that Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania would be, in my mind, the obvious choice for the Democrats, because that takes Pennsylvania off the map, and that gives potentially Joe Biden the election.
I want to ask you.
Sorry, Kamala Harris. And by the way, how many times will people make that mistake over the coming days?
Sign me up.
Muscle memory is a hard thing to fight.
This is so true. We'll keep dating our checks here with Frank Luntz. The question about process I want to ask you about, because there's already this idea of a smoke-filled back room, even though it's the Vice President of the United States, and whether the Democrats should have some sort of mini primary or some sort of nominating contest that makes it feel like she was vetted. Donald Trump on Truth Social, they stole the race from Biden after he won it in the primaries, a first. These people are the real threat to democracy. He's saying that Democrats have rigged the race again. How do they make this appear like this was not some sort of a deal?
Because it's a coronation.
It is a deal, then.
But it requires someone to say, I want to run. It requires a Wes Moore who came out in favor of her.
Right.
It requires a Cory Booker. I've not heard from him yet. It requires some of these other potential candidates. Gavin Newsom came out for Harris. Someone needs to stand up and say, we need this vote. The only one who's done so at this point is Joe Manchin, and it's unclear whether or not he will run, and Manchin is too conservative for the average Democratic delegate.
Well, he told CBS today he's not running. So then it's just Marianne Williams and I guess no one else at this point.
And she got, what, 1% of the vote in the primaries? So this would have been an argument 24 hours ago, but if there's no candidate, then there's no election, and this issue goes away.
As we consider the other side of the aisle here, Donald Trump, and now a Trump-Vance ticket, because he had to make this selection of who his vice presidential nominee was going to be before all of this went down. What needs to change for two white men as they compete against potentially a woman of color? How can they attack Kamala Harris without being vilified for it in some sense?
Well, they will be, but that doesn't mean it matters.
So they just treat her like they treated Hillary Clinton in 2016?
It worked for Trump. We forget that. When Trump was elected, she was not, even though she got more popular votes. I think that people are aware of it. But in the end, if you're a working class voter, and more specifically, if you live paycheck to paycheck, you're going to ask yourself, which one of these people know my circumstance and which one of these people can fix my circumstance? It's 25% of the electorate working paycheck to paycheck. The candidate that has the best agenda for those people and seems to empathize with them and understands them. J.D. Vance comes from them. That's who he was. And his language is actually better than Donald Trump's in speaking to them. It's not necessarily inspiring to the corporate community, and particularly the people who watch this show. This is a very educated and a wealthy audience that you have. This is not a J.D. Vance audience. This is not a Donald Trump audience. But the people who do care, does she come across as being flippant? Does she come across as truly understanding and empathizing? Or is she trying to score political points? And this is the one thing that the Democrats have gotten wrong. In times of economic distress, they hear the Democratic message, but they hate it if they think that they're being taken advantage of, if they think it's just a political ploy or partisan trick. And she, in the past, has communicated that a less than forthcoming persona. I remind you, she raised tens of millions of dollars as a candidate in 2020. She didn't even make it to Iowa. So she's had the chance before. She didn't succeed, but this is a new game, a new day, a new office, a new electorate. So I would not hold, I would say to you that everything begins fresh right now.
Well, as you were talking about who's going to appeal to the working class voter that lives paycheck to paycheck, which J.D. Vance obviously tried to do in accepting the nomination. He, of course, grew up in Ohio, but his family was from Kentucky. And we heard from the Kentucky governor, Andy Beshear, about that notion when he spoke on MSNBC's Morning Joe earlier today. This is what he said.
Let me just tell you that J.D. Vance ain't from here. Now, the nerve that he has to call the people of Kentucky, of eastern Kentucky, lazy. Listen, these are the hardworking coal miners that powered the Industrial Revolution, that created the strongest middle class the world has ever seen, powered us through 2 world wars. We should be thanking them, not calling them lazy.
He, of course, is a Democratic governor in what is a deep red state. Some have suggested he, too, would be a good complement to Kamala Harris as a vice president. But I know you said Shapiro earlier. Would Beshear be just as good of a choice?
No, because he can't bring Kentucky. He barely won his reelection. He does not bring that state over. Kentucky is solidly Republican. He's been successful in winning that state for himself, but he will not win it for the Harris ticket. But he makes a really good point electorally, not in what Vance said, but in how quick people are to respond, to take things out of context, to really jump on, in some cases, badly spoken words, in other cases, twisted words. That's what's going to happen every single day for the next 100 days. And so what are we going to have? An electorate that trusts no one. All this is going to be is point, counterpoint, attack, counterattack for 100 days. And the states in play are going to see this on their computers, on their laptops, on their iPads, on their phones, on the billboards, on the TV ads, on everything. I would not want to be from Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin, because you will hate politics by the time this is done.
I only have 30 seconds. I don't want to cut you off. How important is it for Nancy Pelosi to bless this today?
She's going to do it. And Hakeem Jeffries is going to do it. The timing, it doesn't matter. It's not that they're holding out.
Yeah.
It's that people just go quickly and some people go a little bit more slowly. She's the nominee. There is no contest. There is no vote. There is no debate. There's nothing. It's Harris versus Trump, and God help us all.
God help us all, says Frank Luntz, the voice we wanted today. Thank you so much, Frank, for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. We continue our conversation ahead while many in the Democratic Party are quickly supporting Kamala Harris. Some prominent Democratic donors are questioning this idea. We'll have more next with our political panel on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kayleigh Lyons in Washington, where things are happening very quickly now, Kayleigh, in the effort to coalesce around Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee in waiting. It's been remarkable to see the headlines fly, even since we've been on the air. Two senators, John Fetterman, Chris Van Hollen. Fetterman, the more newsy one there, coming into the fold, several groups, and also state delegations. This is the business at hand. We'll talk about this with our panel in just a moment, and some pretty important ones here. Florida added to the mix. North Carolina, looks like we might have another one on our hands now.
Yeah, Politico is reporting that Pennsylvania's delegates have just voted unanimously to endorse Harris as well. So she's starting to line up the actual number she needs to secure the nomination. And, of course, she's continuing to line up endorsements as we go here. But what is just as notable as those who have endorsed her is those who still have not.
That's true.
Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leadership in both the House and Senate, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, the Obamas, all voices we have not heard definitively from, even though all released statements praising President Biden after his decision yesterday.
The big four. They're being called now in Washington. We love to put titles on the groups like
and
this,
just like that, Joe.
Oh, my gosh.
You get the
here
statement from Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris.
Frank Luntz told us it was done, just a matter of time, and that he said would be the case for all parties here. Nancy Pelosi now makes it official.
In part of her statement, she says Kamala Harris, as a woman in politics, is brilliantly astute, and I have full confidence that she will lead us to victory in November. She says in the Democratic Party, our diversity is our strength and our unity is our power. We must now unify and charge forward to resoundingly defeat Donald Trump and enthusiastically elect Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States. She ends the statement, Joe, with onward to victory.
Keeping in mind it was Nancy Pelosi who orchestrated the pressure campaign to get Joe Biden to drop out of this cycle. She may not be the Speaker of the House any longer, but she has been driving this conversation from her own corner. Of course, her protege, Hakeem Jeffries, I suspect will be soon to follow. Then the questions again about Chuck Schumer. With a majority now, we should note, of Democratic senators backing Kamala Harris. The Obamas remain an interesting question mark here, following what some would suggest is a challenged relationship with the Biden family. We'll be curious to see what this means for Kamala Harris. But Kayleigh, the idea at this point of a contested convention or a mini primary is starting to sound highly unlikely with names like these coming behind the Harris campaign.
Yeah, especially considering that all of those who may have been willing to throw their hats in the race for the nomination,
that's right,
including a number of high-profile Democratic governors, have come out and endorsed Harris. And, of course, now independent Senator Joe Manchin, who we understood yesterday was teasing the notion of re-registering as a Democrat and throwing his hat in the ring, said this morning he would not. Yeah. So even if there were to be a contested convention, it's not clear who exactly wants a contest.
That's correct. Let's bring it to our political panel now. Great to have Rick Davis with us, a StoneCourt Capital, of course. Bloomberg contributor Jeanne Zaino at Iona University, our signature panel. Great to have you both here. Jeanne, what's your thought? Nancy Pelosi has spoken. You may not be surprised by what she said, but sometimes it feels differently when it happens. Is this over? Kamala Harris is the nominee.
It is looking closer and closer to being over. I love the fact that Nancy Pelosi listened to you and Kayleigh, and the minute you called for it, she delivered. And they are all going to be following suit. You know, I don't think this is out of character for Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. They have not wanted to get ahead of the delegates traditionally in this kind of thing, but they too will follow suit. I think the bigger question here is going to be, do any donors hold back? We've already heard from a few who haven't been forthcoming yet, and they may follow suit as it's clearer and clearer that she is going to be the nominee. But I think as it pertains to elected officials, to your point, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, eventually the Obamas, they will all follow suit, because one thing the Democrats don't have an appetite for is more chaos. They want this resolved, and they want to go forward and try to beat Donald Trump, who they still feel is a threat to democracy. So I think that sort of explains why we're seeing this lineup so quickly. And of course, to Frank's point earlier, you can't beat somebody with nobody, and nobody has stepped forward to challenge Kamala Harris.
Rick, does this risk backfiring on the Democrats? Could this be seen in the eyes of some voters who are already not pleased with the choices that were laid before them in this election, now to have effectively the third choice, the alternate choice, decided for them? Could this be a problem?
No, I think we all need to sort of just check our temperature here. I mean, the reality is this is summer. This is when these kinds of things happen. Usually it's August, not July, but the bottom line is very few people are paying any attention to this presidential campaign at this stage. They now know that Donald Trump's become the nominee of the Republican Party. And because of the blitzkrieg over the weekend, I'd say half the people probably now realize that Joe Biden is not running. It'll take a while for this to sink in. And the reality is people weren't expecting a competition. They weren't bated breath like us waiting for Joe Biden to withdraw his candidacy and open it up to a convention. I mean, you know, these are things we care a lot about, but regular voters don't. They want to offer up, you know, give us your candidates, come after Labor Day, they'll focus in, and they'll see what's going on. Remember, I mean, only a little over 20 million people watched Donald Trump's speech at the convention. I mean, this was heralded as the biggest thing. He had just had an assassination attempt. He was going to describe it for the first time on the stage. When John McCain got the nomination in 2008, 80 million people focused in, 55, 60 million more than Donald Trump. Nobody is paying attention to this campaign because they didn't like either of the candidates. They don't like Trump and they don't like Biden. Now they're going to have to figure out, do they like Kamala?
So much for the Hulk Hogan draw. Jeanne, now that we do have Milwaukee behind us, no one's talking about it today, whether they watched it or not, because this is the story right now. Whether you call it a coronation or something else, Kamala Harris has to get on the road and, to Rick's point, start identifying herself and attempting, I guess, to identify her opponent, even though people know a lot about Donald Trump at this point. How does she turn the age issue on him starting now?
First of all, I'm very sad to hear Rick Davis say nobody's paying attention to this. He may be right, but gosh, it's all I'm living and breathing. So it's troubling at the very least. You know, I think what she's got to do is she's got to reintroduce herself to the American people. As vice president, she was handed initially a couple of really difficult tasks. Number one being the border. Number two being the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And that has not, boded very well for her on both areas. So she needs to, now that she is going to be on the top of this ticket, potentially reintroduce herself. And we already hear what her campaign wants to focus on: reproductive rights and her prosecutorial background. And those are two critically important issues: crime, the issue of security, and the issue of freedom and liberty to do with our bodies what we want. Those are amongst, if you set aside the all-important issue of the economy and inflation, the most important issue on the minds of many voters. And so she needs to focus on those, and she needs to prove her bona fides there, and she needs to distinguish herself from Donald Trump. The more she can make this about Donald Trump, who is now the oldest nominee ever to run for president, the better off for her, because many of his issues are not attractive, and he has never broken through that ceiling of about 47%.
Well, Jeanne, as you talk about Kamala Harris as a prosecutor, can she not only make age an issue in a way that it hasn't been for Donald Trump as much as it was for Joe Biden, but also Donald Trump's conviction on 34 felony counts in the hush money case in New York? We saw Joe Biden attempting to do that in the debate. I think we all know how that went down. By and large, it doesn't seem to have dented Trump's appeal for American voters at all. Can Kamala Harris change that?
She absolutely can. We need to remember the reason she is vice president is because her strong debate against Joe Biden. She is a very good prosecutor and a very good debater. And you could even just go back and look at the clips of her questioning somebody like Brett Kavanaugh from her perch in the Senate. She knows how to prosecute these cases. She does so effectively, and she can do it against Donald Trump. It's going to be fascinating if we get them in the same room and that debate goes forward, hopefully on Bloomberg as opposed to ABC. But if it goes forward on ABC, I'll be watching. But it is going to be fascinating because let's not forget, Donald Trump has had a track record of difficulty against women, and she is a woman who is a formidable debater. She hasn't proven herself to be as great at campaigning, but a very good prosecutor and debater.
Rick, if you were advising Donald Trump's campaign, then, with that said, would you allow him on stage with Kamala Harris, or is it imperative that he debate her?
Yeah, I would probably tell him not to debate. He's not a great debater to begin with. If not for the, complete disaster, which was the Joe Biden performance, we'd all be talking about, almost 30 untruths told by Donald Trump at the debate, his aggressive style. I mean, I think that anytime Donald Trump gets in front of another candidate, he can't help himself but go right for the throat. And doing that to Vice President Harris, I think, would be very dangerous. The reality is they're playing from a lead. He's already said he doesn't want to debate ABC and that George Stephanopoulos guy. He'd much rather have now this debate in Fox. Sounds to me like a great exit door to kicking the can on a debate. If I were Kamala Harris's team, I'd say, yeah, Fox is great. We'd love to go into your house and show you up. I'd call their cards on it like today.
Wow.
Well, Rick, as you pointed out, we did get a Truth Social post from Donald Trump yesterday, who talked about how he was slated to debate Joe Biden on what he calls fake news ABC, the home of George Slopadopoulous, sometime in September. He said, now that Joe has not surprisingly quit the race, I think the debate with whomever the radical left Democrats choose should be held on Fox News rather than the very biased ABC. I guess we'll see where that goes. But while we're talking about other news outlets, it's worth noting that according to Politico, they have just scooped that Future Forward, the flagship super PAC blessed by Joe Biden, received $150 million in new commitments from major Democratic donors in the 24 hours since Biden announced he would step aside. If we're following the money, Jeanne, what does that tell you?
That tells us that this thing is pretty much over in terms of her being the nominee. Those are incredibly strong numbers for her and the way in which Joe Biden engineered this endorsement. So the Democrats got to be feeling good. They can't get over their skis on this. Of course, there's a lot of ground cover here. But the money issue and the fact that it looks like she can move into this campaign fairly smoothly and take over the campaign apparatus, that bodes very well for Kamala Harris and the Democrats. And so I think they've got to be looking at that and the 50 million we heard about earlier in the day as a strong endorsement, particularly the small donor money.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, our great panel with us here, our signature panel on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. I just want to wrap with this, Rick, big picture here. It's something that came from the Florida delegation meeting a bit earlier on today as they coalesced behind Kamala Harris. There was a statement that emerged following their endorsement, and it said that we're running a prosecutor against a convicted felon. Is that in the end how you would frame this contest?
Well, it's one of the ways. I think it's a nice contrast, and it brings back up the low point of Donald Trump's campaign so far was the week after his conviction. So I think Democrats want to get back to having that conversation, and I think that's right. I think this prosecutor's role has multiple values. If she was thinking about it, she'd go down the border and give a speech about how, as a prosecutor, she learned how to get on top of crime and wouldn't allow a single criminal, whether they're, human traffickers or cartels or coming from other countries. Not one criminal is going to cross this border if I'm president. I mean, she can change the tone of this thing with that one credential in a way that nobody else could.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you so much for joining us as we try to parse through exactly how this race has been upended in the last 24 hours and what all of this means. Certainly, financial markets are trying to get their heads around that as well. So let's get a check on those now. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle is with us from New York. So, Abigail, we've talked a lot about the Trump trade. Is there a Harris trade out there?
I don't know that there's a Harris trade yet because we don't know exactly what her policies would be. We can imagine that they would be similar to that of the current administration. But what's really standing out to me is you and Joe are breaking these headlines about influential Democrats, most notably recently and moments ago, actually, former House Speaker Pelosi endorsing VP Kamala Harris, the idea that perhaps we will have Minority Leader Jeffries follow and then Senator Chuck Schumer follow as well. We don't know if those other two, but as Jeanne and Rick were talking about, the odds seem increasing that Kamala Harris will, in fact, be the party's nominee. Markets that are at session high. So markets like this certainty, the S&P 500 up 1%, the Dow, which earlier had been lower, now up about 0.2%. That NASDAQ 100, which had been down 2 weeks in a row, the first time in many, many weeks, up 1.5%. Now let's break this down through the VIX, because the VIX is an actual measure of uncertainty or certainty. And what I'd really like to point out here is as that headline crossed about former House Speaker Pelosi endorsing VP Harris, the VIX went back below 15. Now, what makes this so interesting in the bottom panel, what we're looking at is the VIX itself, again, a measure of uncertainty. As the uncertainty increased last week around President Biden's fate, it increased to 17, the highest level we had seen it in quite a few months. The VIX curve itself increased. That's a fancy way of saying that investors were uncertain. Now it's all cooling off. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because it was always also cooling off after Donald Trump's the assassination attempt, as investors thought that there was more certainty that way. But when we peel back beneath the surface, the Trump trade, we may not have a Harris trade to look at this moment, but the Trump trade is cooling off. We have big tech hire. Alphabet and Tesla are both up ahead of earnings tomorrow. Tesla, on the one hand, because of CEO Elon Musk's ardent support of Donald Trump. Maybe that's a little bit of a Trump trade. The true Trump trade, DJT, Trump Media and Entertainment, well, it's down about 2.1%. And then very interesting, Halliburton, the drilling company, is also off 2%. And drilling and energy, of course, to the upside, the idea that more drilling could happen under a Trump administration. Well, today that idea is cooling off. But the one thing I would say over the last 6 weeks or 6 days or since the debate, anything is possible. Stay tuned. We'll see if that VIX shoots back up or if it's going to continue to go lower.
All right, Abigail, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle watching the markets for us as we cover politics here in Washington on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines. With great questions now, Kaylee, assuming this is the case, and boy, it sure seems like it today. Kamala Harris has no challengers. She has the bulk of the Democratic Party behind her, with a couple of key exceptions. We're waiting to hear from the Obamas, for instance, and Chuck Schumer, but remarkable number of endorsements just today alone, including state delegations. So the question becomes the messaging that she will pose against Donald Trump, the narrative that she could turn on the age issue, but also on the race issue, with Donald Trump showing in polls that he's been attracting many young black voters, black men, for instance, away from Joe Biden, which has been confounding for the Biden campaign. And you wonder if it stops that narrative dead in its tracks.
Well, this is something I actually asked a pollster for the what was the Biden-Harris campaign, Glynda Lake, about last night, whether or not Kamala Harris is the candidate who can bring back some of that coalition, young voters, voters of color, back into the Democratic Party where they had strayed away. And this was her response.
She is exactly the person to bring that coalition together. And it's not just bringing it together, which is a very good question. It's also energizing it. A lot of young people and people of color are thinking, I can stay home on the couch here. I don't have to go to the polls. So energize them, unite them, and energize and unite our side, litigate the case, make a strong case for our accomplishments. She's a great candidate at just the right moment.
Let's add the voice now of Glynda Carr, President, CEO, and co-founder of Higher Heights for America. Glynda, it's great to have you with us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. What is your thought on this?
I mean, this is a pivotal election cycle. We said this before yesterday. And so I think I would say that we're in her first full day as candidate for President Kamala Harris. And so we can have multiple feelings, right? I think people know the direction of where the Democrats are going. We can obviously thank Joe Biden for his service and mourn the loss of his suspension, right? We also can celebrate. Higher Heights is the political home for Black women. We help Black women to vote, run, win, and lead. And over the last 24 hours, it's an opportunity to be excited about the historic nature of a Kamala Harris presidency. But also, we know that as we celebrate, we're going to prepare to support, defend, mobilize, and organize.
Well, Glynda, I'm glad you point out the historic nature of this. Obviously, the United States of America has never had a woman as president, let alone a woman of color. Are you convinced the country is ready for it now?
I need America to believe in the possibilities of a Kamala Harris presidency. Not just because it's a historic, because she sits at the intersection of race and gender, but here is a woman who has run and won and governed on every level of government. She was a local elected official. She was a statewide executive as Attorney General for California. She was a federal elected leader in the U.S. Senate and now is governing as vice president. She is duly qualified for this moment. But listening to my colleague Glynda Lake, I believe that, her multiple identities is her superpower. In this moment of a divided country, I believe her candidacy and the way she will organize her campaign will build a coalition of voters looking to move this country to higher heights in a moment where we're concerned about rolling back the very rights that my grandmother and mother have fought for on women's rights, human rights, voting rights, and on reproductive rights.
There could be more endorsements coming in the next couple of hours here as CNN reports essentially what we were just talking about here. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries to endorse Harris as soon as today, unlocked potentially by Nancy Pelosi's endorsement that will likely lead the way to more. Glynda, I'm taken by the language, the rhetoric we're already hearing in this campaign, and I know that this is nothing new for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump specifically mispronounces her name on purpose, and his campaign is now referring to her. This is from a co-manager of the campaign, not even Donald Trump himself, referring to her as Laughin' Kamala. We heard Cacklin' Kamala coming from Donald Trump on the podium. These tropes, does she acknowledge them or move on?
I think that's the work of organizations like Higher Heights on two fronts, calling out the racism and sexism in this moment, but also the mis and disinformation that has swirled around Kamala Harris. Particularly, there is a portion of this country that has created it politically toxic and racially divisive times. I think most Americans want an election where we are fighting and debating on values, on policies, and on the direction of this country. And I think you're going to see a growing course of not only just Black women, but Americans who are going to call out Trump and his supporters on creating unnecessary, negative attack on Vice President Harris.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Glynda, as you talk about the values of this group of voters in particular, what we've been talking about for this entire election cycle is how ultimately the outcome could be just about turnout, about whether voters in key swing states actually show up and cast a vote. What are the values, what are the issues that drive turnout this cycle for this group?
Voters are concerned about the direction of this country, first and foremost. People are ready for a new direction in this country. As it relates to the work of Higher Heights, organizing Black women, when they're fired up, which given what we've seen over the last 24 hours, Black women do not organize themselves to the polls. They also bring their house, their block, their church, their sorority, and their union. I believe that a Kamala Harris presidency will also ignite the possibilities of leadership of young voters and a coalition of voters that come from different parts of this country, social economic backgrounds that have a common goal about making sure that we are creating economically thriving, educated, healthy, and safe community for all Americans. And in this moment, I believe in the possibilities of Black women leading America. We need to have direct conversations with those that we live with and our neighbors about the direction of this country and what the work will need to be done to ensure that we are having a free, fair election where voters can vote for the candidate they believe is best suited in this moment.
Will her record as a prosecutor hurt or help her with the Black community and with the electorate at large?
I think it's important to say the first thing that Vice President Harris said yesterday in her statement was she wants to earn the vote of Americans. And that is her work, to talk about her record, which is broad. Again, I said this is a woman who has run, won, and governed on all levels of government. And she's going to make the case that her portfolio of work, her portfolio of accomplishments, and her vision for this country will create a value-based case of how she's going to earn the votes of Americans across this country.
Glynda, obviously we focused pretty much all of our conversation today on Kamala Harris being a presidential candidate, but I know at Higher Heights you're focused on elevating Black women in all areas of government. What do you expect the trickle-down effect of her candidacy, or potentially we could be talking about her presidency one day, will have for others to follow her?
The late Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to serve in Congress, once said, "I have faith in America." I certainly believe that my fellow Americans have wavered in that in the last couple of years, given the turmoil of our democracy. Kamala Harris's candidacy will energize not only Black voters and Black women, but a coalition of voters that will create a wave to elect a very diverse group of candidates that are running across this country, including her ability to support electing 2 Black women to the U.S. Senate. Currently, there have only been 2 Black women elected and serving in the United States House of Representatives in 1992, Carol Moseley Braun being the first Black woman to serve. And it almost took 20 years to have the second, which was Kamala Harris in 2016. We currently have LaFonza Butler from California serving. She was appointed earlier this year. We've never had a Black woman 2 Black women serving at the same time. And we have 2 candidates, current Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester in Delaware and Prince George's executive, Angela Alsobrooks in Maryland running. And they're both two competitive races that have an opportunity to catapult two Black women to the U.S. Senate at the same time.
Well, Glynda, we're glad you could join us today. Glynda Carr of Higher Heights for America PAC, thank you for the insights and what is clearly the best backdrop we're going to get all day here on Bloomberg TV. It's great to have you as part of our conversation. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kayleigh Lines with a lot of questions, but many of them answered during the time of this broadcast, Kayleigh, and maybe later on today. We're waiting on Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer. The Obamas, I guess, may be a little bit different. They're not actually office holders here in Washington, but these are the endorsements that will close the deal. Yeah, now that Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi has come out with a full-throated endorsement for Kamala Harris, the question is, did we just have an open convention, if you will, but it only lasted for the last 24 hours since It's been almost exactly that amount of time since Joe Biden exited this race. Isn't that true? We'll bring in two more voices covering this story. The best of Bloomberg, Julie Fine, our Texas bureau chief, and Gregory Korte helping to cover politics here in Washington. Great to have both of you with us. Gregory, what are you hearing? Or do we get the likes of Schumer and Jeffries before this day is out? Could this all be done today?
You really get the sense that this is snowballing, right? That the endorsements are coming in by the minute and the hour. We're also hearing state delegations weighing in.
That's
Last
right.
I looked when I walked into the studio here, 750 of the 1,976 pledged delegates that Kamala Harris needs had already pledged to her. So by the end of the day, maybe tomorrow, we can start calling her presumptive nominee. Amazing. You really get the sense that the party's rallying around her. There was a little bit of a moment where the party had to make a decision. Do we rally around Kamala Harris, or do we have an open process at the convention to let other voices? I think that time's passed.
That seems to have been answered.
If any other credible candidate was going to emerge, they needed to emerge in the first 12 hours. That's passed. We're now coming up on the 24-hour mark since President Biden said he would no longer run again. This is very quickly rallying around Kamala Harris as the party's nominee.
Well, of course, it's not just about endorsements. It's also about donations. Julie, we knew that Act Blue raised some $50 million from Democratic donors, or those are the figures that Act Blue reported in the 7 hours after Kamala Harris announced that she did intend to compete for the Democratic nomination. Now, Politico reporting this hour that a super PAC linked to Biden, Future Forward, received 150 million new commitments from Democratic donors after he announced he would step aside from the race. What is the money telling us here?
Well, the money's telling you you're going to get more money. Once you see donors hopping on, then ones that were hesitant or ones who are waiting, donors saying, is it going to be Bashir? Is it going to be this person? Is it going to be that person? It's likely going to be Kamala Harris. So now you've got donors that are all moving in the same direction, which is really helpful for the Democratic Party. So I think the fact that the vice president really solidified her support so quickly. You just heard Gregory talking about delegates. Texas has more than 270 delegates, 273. This is a state. They're meeting tonight, and they're going to decide their path forward. So by the time they meet, they're going to see all this money going in her direction and all these delegates going in her direction. So this is very good news for a Democratic Party that was seeing some of their donors dry up.
Julie, how much of a concern should it be for Democrats to appear that like this is a coronation? Donald Trump is already calling them out for stealing, quote unquote, I'll give you air quotes on camera here, the election from Joe Biden. The lack of a contest for people who haven't been paying a lot of attention means what?
Well, I think it's going to be frustrating for some people. I spoke to an independent yesterday who said, can't we just have a minute here to try to see what happens? But at the end of the day, I think, like many others, they're going to fall in line or they're going to stay home. Most likely, a lot of voters that lean Democrat, if they're frustrated with the process, likely will fall in line and when they look at their options of what to do.
Well, on the subject of options, Gregory, if we're thinking it could be a matter of hours or days before Kamala Harris becomes the presumptive presidential nominee, when are we going to find out about the vice presidential nominee?
That's obviously one of the first big decisions that she has to make. And it's really, for all the talk about what a running mate brings to the ticket, what it brings to the ticket is really an insight into the decision-making process of the person at the top of the ticket. So whether or not we get somebody who moderates the ticket by moving to the center, somebody who can nail down the progressive wing of the party, maybe geographical balance, gender or racial balance, whatever those criteria are that she's considering in this mix, that'll kind of give an insight of how she's going to govern. She has until the convention to make that decision. We saw Donald Trump wait until literally the moment of the roll call to say who he was going to ask his delegates to nominate as vice president. But she might have less time than that. We're still waiting on the party to decide whether or not they're going to nominate Kamala Harris at the convention, or whether they're going to do so in some kind of virtual roll call vote to meet some of these ballot deadlines that are still a little iffy. So this is something that she's got to turn her attention to pretty quickly, if she's going to do all the vetting that you want to do of a vice presidential nominee.
All right, Bloomberg's Gregory, Korte, and Julie Fine, thank you so much for joining us as we mark now 24 hours since the moment the world seemed to change. Joe Biden not seeking re-election. And, of course, the endorsements for Kamala Harris have continued to pour in. Just this hour, we heard from Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi with her endorsement. And apparently we're about to hear from the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, CNN reporting that he and Chuck Schumer could endorse as soon as today. And Hakeem Jeffries is set to hold a presser in just a few minutes at 2 p.m. Eastern, Joe.
Yes, indeed. We'll have ears on it for you here in Washington.
Indeed, and we'll continue our coverage of the political and economic outlook later on this evening. Joe and I will be back for the 5 p.m. edition of Balance of Power right here on Bloomberg TV and radio, so make sure to join us then. This is Bloomberg.